1997, there was a theme park like no other.
Yeah.
An infamous experiment
kids with a bunch of rules. I'm just going to leave safety up to them.
Eugene Mulvihill's
Period.
action
Wait,
park
no.
was a huge...
Wait, not period. Not period. That's actually not good. Okay, guys. That's not good at all.
popular and much loved New Jersey attraction, remembered fondly for its experimental and thrilling rides, but also for ending in bankruptcy, scandal, and tragedy.
Jesus.
A lot of people got hurt over there. As you can see, it was like extreme sports. They nicknamed it Traction Park.
A slight alteration of its official slogan sums
Have
it
y'all
up
heard of
quite
Action
well.
Park?
Action Park, where you're the center of the accident.
Yeah,
in today's video,
that's how
we're
it
going to
should be.
dive into the strange world of America's deadliest amusement park. On the 26th of
Are
May,
y'all
1970,
really fans of amusement parks? I'm not gonna lie, bro. I haven't went to an amusement park in years. Years. I might head to Florida. Go to something out there. You know what I'm saying? Something slight. Might go to something in Virginia. Go check out True God in Virginia. We might mess around and let me stop. I'm on Twitch right now. Link is in the description, so you should come join. Because if you don't,
1978, businessman Eugene Mulvihill stood admiring a creation he hoped would transform his business forever. Gene, as he was known, owned a company called Great American Recreation, which
Okay.
crucially operated a ski resort in the Vernon Valley and Great Gorge skiing areas of Vernon Township, New Jersey. Gene really wanted to address an inevitable difficulty of running a ski resort business. During the summer off-season, when the snow has long disappeared, your resort turns into little more than a regular grass hill. And as the snow goes, so does a significant majority of your
goes.
business.
Yes.
Ski resorts had for some time been experimenting with opening summer attractions to make the land bring in revenue during this off-season.
Yeah,
And Gene
smart.
wanted to do the same. Following the example of other resorts, in 1976 he installed a 2,700-foot alpine slide down one of the steeper
Those
trails,
look
and by
terrifying, though. Like, they
1978
look
added 2
dangerous.
water slides and a go-kart track. The result was a collection of attractions that became known as Vernon Valley Summer Park, which
Okay.
would open that May. This made it one of the first water parks in America, and over the following 2 decades,
you can, yo, if a kid falls off of this, bro, they might get a concussion.
This
Let's
made
be for
it
real.
one of the
A kid definitely can't
first
get on this, bro.
water
They're gonna get
park-
slung, head banged against
parks
the
in
walls
America,
back and
over the
forth.
following 2 decades would grow to 75 separate rides under its rebranded name Action Park. But as well as its massive size, Action Park was unique in one very particular way. As his son Andy Mulvihill put it, Gene didn't want to do the same old shit where you just get strapped into something or it twirls around. He wanted to take the
He
idea
said, "I don't want my people to be safe." That's basically what they said. They said, "Hey, I don't want y'all to be safe. I want there to be a chance where y'all get a concussion. Maybe some of y'all do need to hit up in the hospital."
of skiing, which is exhilarating because you control the action, and transfer it into an amusement park. There's inherent risk in that, but that's what made it fun. This simple philosophy of putting the guest in control made the park hugely successful, but would also become its biggest
Some
controversy.
people don't need free reign
Action
of being told
Park's
to do whatever
first
they want.
ride was coincidentally one of its all-time most dangerous. The 2,700-foot sledding track
Yeah,
was
it
constructed
looks
out of a
dangerous.
mixture of concrete, fiberglass, and asbestos. Patrons would slide down the winding track on a small sled using only a handbrake to slow their descent. Injuries were atrociously frequent as patrons were sent down without much prior warning of the high likelihood their sled could jump the tracks on tight corners if they failed to apply the required amount of braking.
I mean, you can see it though. Like, you can see that's the problem. What do you mean I can jump out the track? Hello? Shouldn't somebody tell me that? Do I need to sign a waiver to ride this?
or lean to distribute their weight properly. Owing to poor maintenance practices, the sled's braking system would really only offer 2 settings: extremely slow and a speed described by a former employee as death awaits. The result was patrons usually wearing only bathing suits and most definitely without any helmets or protection would regularly be thrown off their sled, suffering severe abrasions and broken limbs. Between 1984 and 1985, the slide alone was responsible for 14 fractures and 26 head injuries.
Jesus.
In fact, it's reported that at the end of a busy day, staff would find certain sections of the slide coated in a reddish sheen of blood and shredded skin.
Okay, guys. Today, let's do our daily cleanup of the dead skin on the ride. You know, there's a little bit of blood on the middle of the track. Nothing too crazy. There's going to be some blood over there as well. This is a normal thing. The clients love the pain. They get a thrill from the pain, so we don't need to worry about it. Just go clean that up off the slide. Thank you.
Staff kept a magic potion of 70% alcohol and 10% iodine on hand to spray down severely carpet-burned patrons. An employee was ejected at such a high velocity that the resulting injury...
Pause approximately 202 donated $4.99.
Is that all you had to say?
Burned patrons. An employee was ejected at such a high velocity that the resulting injury gouged the back of his legs and butt so badly that he needed 200 stitches. And
you worked there! Come on, man.
Finally, just to add insult to injury, because the Alpine slide travelled directly under the park's former ski lift, those riding would routinely get spat or urinated on from above. The slide was
Why are they getting peed on? Why? No, cause what do you mean routinely? But who is doing what do you mean what do you mean routine? Like who's just whipping it out and going
located at the Alpine Centre, one of the 3 main sections of Action Park, the other 2 being Motorworld and Waterworld, which housed the vast majority of the park's rides. The nearby skateboard park was closed after only a single season due to inadequate build quality. The skating bowls were separated from each other by pavement, which in many cases did not match the height of the bowl edge, meaning boards would get stuck on the lip. A former employee commented it was responsible for so many injuries that we covered it up with dirt and pretended it never happened. And in fact, some of the rides were so dangerous they never even managed to open to the public at all. The Bailey Ball was such an attraction, essentially a
You cannot say that doesn't look like someone could die in that. That looks like, bro, that looks like a spaceship, an alien. I don't know, bro. That might just be a giant's bead for their buttocks. A giant's booty bead, bro. What is that? A bomb? Look like an underwater mine.
Large steel sphere with industrial roller wheels bolted all around the outside, creating what can only be described as a replica World War II era anti-submarine mine. The idea was a human rider would be secured inside and rolled downhill on a PVC pipe track. However, when
they are crazy for that idea. Who they are insane for that thought.
State inspector arrived to see the ball in action. The summer heat had expanded the piping, causing the ball, with a man inside it, to fly off the tracks, rolling down the steep slope uncontrolled and traveling straight through the parking lot across Route 94 and finally coming to rest in a swamp. It said that the inspector watched silently as the ball came to a rest before promptly leaving without saying a word. Management abandoned this masterpiece. After the first season in 1978, Gene sought to expand his park, believing the best way to do this was, quote, by legalizing driving in a collection of attractions known as Motorworld. The first ride of
because where did he get his money from? Why does he have money? He only has money because of the ski resort thing? Man said, okay, yeah. Let's make everyone take 5 shots before they get into a vehicle. Everyone must take 5 shots.
Here was the Grand Prix track, featuring 3/4 size Formula 1 races that could travel at over 50 miles per hour. If that wasn't concerning enough, the park operated an alcohol drinks bar only a few meters away. Patrons would ride these races drunk and
look
often
at how tight Look at how tight this track is, bro.
Using a fake driver's license. One employee actually broke into the park in the middle of the night, stole a Lola Racer, and disabled its inbuilt speed limiter before taking it for a joyride down Route 94. Police reportedly pursued the employee at over 90 miles per hour for several miles before he was apprehended.
Sorry. What? What? He disabled the limiter and took it on the freeway? He was just a bad person to begin with, though.
Similar to the Lola Racers were the Super Go-Karts. Drivers were not required to present a license here, which would not be so concerning were it not for the fact that the inbuilt speed limiter could be disabled by wedging in a tennis ball, enabling patrons to fly around at speeds reaching 50 miles an hour. A particularly unique injury that would occur here is that because the karts ran on petrol engines, the fume inhalations would regularly make patrons sick, and sometimes the gas caps would fly off the carts as people drove along, splashing out the liquid fuel and hitting drivers further behind in a kind of Mario Kart style attack. The super speedboats suffered a very similar issue.
Donated $4.99. Waka, when are you going to react to another Corey X Kenshin video?
I'm not.
Tamer attraction nearby called bumper boats took the idea of hitting cars into each other and then put that on water. The problem was not with the bumper boats ride itself, more that patrons would treat the faster super speed boats as bumper boats, smashing the flimsy boats into each other at excessive speeds. Anyone too tall would have to dangle their legs over the side, and you can imagine just how regularly this caused lower extremity fractures. The engine fumes also coated the lake water in a kind of oily sheen, burning and irritating guests unlucky enough to fall into the water after a high speed.
Of course they got this fit hunk of a man in the picture, bro. Look at him. I'm talking every you can see every muscle pulsating. Get his off my screen, bro. Pissing me off. Get normal people.
Collision. Petrol-induced delirium was the reward for anyone who managed to stay inside the boat. And finally, another noteworthy attraction for Motorworld was one of the park's most popular attractions called Battle Action Tanks, featuring little mobile tanks that fired tennis balls from a cannon. If you shot another tank's hit point, it would temporarily disable movement, and static cannons placed on the arena's perimeter also allowed guests standing outside to fire in. This particular attraction was one of the staff's least favorite to guard because of the high likelihood of getting pelted with tennis balls that would fire at over 90 miles an hour while trying to perform maintenance of getting pelted with tennis balls that would fire at over 90 miles an hour while...
Is he saying 90 or 19? It gotta be 19, because if it's 90 they get knocked out. Gotta be 19
while trying to perform maintenance in the area. But finally, the most loved and most infamous section of rides were gathered into an area known as Waterworld. Undoubtedly the most...
Am I going to he's saying 90? That's ridiculous. Am I going to binge another anime? Absolutely not.
Infamous section of rides were gathered into an area known as Waterworld. Undoubtedly the most dangerous, these were the rides that would ultimately lead to the tragic downfall of Action Park. Probably the single most recognizable of all these rides was the Cannonball Loop, a fully enclosed water slide with a unique, completely vertical loop at the end. You tend not to see these at water parks for the perhaps unsurprising reason that shooting people out of a vertical loop is not necessarily conducive to their survival. The ride itself was built kind of by the eyeball, using some nearby car factory workers who had recently been made redundant as labor. When the first test dummies went down, it was reported that one came back missing its head. To convince real humans to go down, the park offered employees $100, and eventually Eugene's son Andy was the first person to do so, but in full hockey protective gear. This ride suffered from an inevitable problem of physics. If a human body was either too light or too heavy, they often wouldn't have the right momentum to safely clear the loop and would get stuck at the top, crashing down on either side. Nosebleeds and facial and back injuries were extremely common, so much so that the ride was only open for a single month before the state's advisory board forced it shut.
A month? They had 30 days to it. That's how you know that ride was a danger to society, bro. A month?
Considering it too dangerous. Some early riders were even coming back with lacerations to their bodies, and when the ride was closed to determine what caused this, teeth that had been knocked out of previous riders' mouths were now lodged in the foam-lined interior walls, slicing open the next riders as they passed through. But the Cannonball Loop was by far from the only crazy installation. The Tarzan swing was a steel arch suspended from a cable over a spring-fed natural pool. Patrons waited in long lines for the chance to swing out and jump off into the water
can
below.
see people hitting each other in the water 100 times over, bro. I can see people just landing on people in the water.
Because this spring
Absolutely.
was fed by mountain water, the temperature rarely exceeded 50 degrees, a fact most only came to appreciate as their bodies immediately went into hypothermic shock
Oh my
upon entering the
gosh.
water, where they would need immediate rescue after being unable to pull themselves back
Whose
out. Another
idea was
danger
this?
Lizardbean_2016
10
donated
degrees Celsius.
$9.99.
Golly.
You should react to the latest episodes of the Skibbity Toilet.
How is Skibby Toilet not over yet? Like, why is it still going on?
If you held on for too long, you risked crashing into the concrete platform at the far side of the pool, something that broke many ankles and toes, but that's just a skill issue really. In fact, unsuspected
is,
danger was a prevalent theme of Waterworld. At the Aquascoot, patrons would skim across a shallow pool of water only slightly deeper than a puddle in places, using a plastic sled in the same manner as skipping a stone over a lake. However, if you lean too far forward or back, the
You'd
edge of
fall.
the sled would bite into the water, catapulting the rider's head directly forward into the shallow puddle, resulting in serious injuries. Even if you avoided this, often the attendant would have
This don't
already
even
let
look
the
fun,
next
I'm not
rider
gonna
down,
lie.
slamming straight into the back of
It
you.
don't even look
The
fun,
collection
bro.
of raft-based artificial whitewater rides were also notoriously dangerous.
Yeah,
Roaring
like, this
Rapids was
is
built to look like a
ridiculous.
natural river, complete with jagged rocks and sharp overhangs that fractured
It
femurs,
looks.
collarbones,
This
and
does.
dislocated.
I'm not gonna lie though. That does look like a blast though. Binge Clone High after Total Drama, bro. We're watching Invincible after Total Drama. We're not binging no Clone High.
Knees and shoulders. One of the courses featured a toilet bowl which flushed riders down into a dark tunnel. A tunnel lined with foam padding that
Oh,
would often
Lord.
tear away from the walls, narrowing the hole and causing human riders to clog the toilet. Attendants would then have to quickly turn off the water supply to stop those congested patrons from
I mean,
drowning.
that's
Surf Hill was
realistic,
another infamous
constipation.
attraction. Patrons would slide down a wet sloped surface on foam mats at high speed, landing in a very shallow puddle. The barriers between
That don't
lanes
look
were
fun
minimal
either.
and people frequently collided with each other on the
That
way
don't look
down
fun
or
either.
at the end. The seventh lane was known as the backbreaker due to a special bump midway intended to allow jumps and splashdowns into a larger puddle. It also had a reputation for causing serious injury, but both employees
Waka, what race are you smashing the hardest? Now look. As a history, I do have love for most races. It's just some races I cannot get behind whatsoever, right? But the race I definitely smashed the hardest would have to be the 200 meter, right? The 400 meter is hard, but like it's something fun about that hard. The 100 is kind of boring, but that 200 meter, that is where my heart lies. I would smash, I would do something crazy to that 200 meter.
and spectators much loved this ride for one very particular quirk. You see, Surf Hill was especially good at separating women from their bikini tops. Women would stand up at the
Swimming
end of the
reference.
surf.
When you hear 200 meters, the first thing you think of is swimming, not track. What? Swimming reference?
Good at separating women from their bikini tops. Women would stand up at
Lizardbean_2016 donated $9.99. Have you watched all 3 Sonic movies? And if you have, what do you rate them?
Don't come in here talking about Sonic. Have you watched all 3 Sonic? No! Not watching one. I'm not watching their show. I'm not playing their games. Sonic? Gotta go fast. I only need one fast boy in my life, and that's Lightning McQueen, bro. F Sonic.
was especially good at separating women from their bikini tops. Quirk. Both employees and spectators. It also special bump midway intended to allow jumps and splashdowns into a larger puddle. It also had a
Okay.
reputation for causing serious injury, but both employees
lovely.
and spectators much loved this
That bump
ride
at
for
the
one
bottom
very
looked like it
particular
sucks.
quirk. You see, Surf Hill was especially good at separating women from their bikini tops. Women
Okay.
would stand up at the end of the surf and, disorientated from hitting the plastic ridges at high speeds, wouldn't realize that they had emerged significantly less covered than they
Oh my
began the
gosh.
ride. A
Oh, let's
nearby
see this.
snack bar was installed specifically to take advantage of this view.
And they set up a snack bar just to see. That's so crazy,
However-
bro. Where's proof of that claim, bro? You could be lying, bro. I just need one clip.
But a single ride stood out from all the others. A ride so deadly it quickly became known by employees as the Grave Pool. The tidal wave pool opened at the start of Action Park's 1981 season.
Younger,
the pool was 100 feet wide and 250 feet long and could hold 500 to 1,000 people at once. This was a seriously large and deep wave pool. The waves were generated by underwater machines for 20 minutes at a time with 10-minute breaks and could reach a whopping 1 meter high. The comparative calm of the water in break periods and could reach a whopping 1 underwater machines for 20 minutes at a time with 10-minute
Is this dangerous? This is like it could be dangerous.
It breaks and could reach a whopping 1 meter high. The comparative calm of the water in break periods contrasted with the severity of those waves in a relatively deep pool that got deeper towards the machine end, meant that patrons would often get sucked much deeper into the pool than they intended, only realizing their mistake when they were in over their depth with nowhere to stand up. Because of the unrestricted entry, the water would often be covered in a dense packed layer of floating rings, which would keep people trapped underwater if they got swept down. The dangerous conditions would often cause people to crowd at the relatively few ladders to escape. 12 lifeguards were on duty permanently, and on high traffic weekends, as many as 30 people would need to be rescued from drowning.
Yo, they were trying to make it as safe as possible.
Comparison,
bro.
a regular pool lifeguard will usually make 0 or a single rescue per year. In fact, when a consultant lifeguard arrived to make recommendations to improve safety, he was so overwhelmed by the severity of the conditions, he simply disappeared and never returned. And out of the hundreds of near drownings, on 3 separate occasions, the wave pool would prove to be fatal. In July of 1982, a 15-year-old boy named George Lopez would drown. 2 years later, 20-year-old Donald DePass, and finally in July 1987, 18-year-old Gregory, 20-year-old Donald DePass, and finally in July 1987, 18-year-old Gregory Grandchamps. These were not the only deaths at Action Park. The first reported death was in 1980 when 19-year-old George Larson Jr. was riding the Alpine slide after hours. His cart jumped the tracks and when ejected, George's head struck a rock. He died from his injuries 8 days later in hospital. Then on the 1st of August 1982, only 2 days after the drowning of George Lopez, 27-year-old Jeffrey Nathan was riding in an attraction we actually haven't covered yet called the Kayak Experience, which despite sounding and being relatively tame compared to some of the other attractions, featured a hidden deadly secret lurking under the water. The Kayak Experience was an artificial whitewater kayak run powered by underwater fans that agitated the water to provide the current. Frequently, kayaks would tip over or get lodged among the concrete rocks, meaning patrons would have to step out of the kayak in order to right it again. When Jeffrey stepped out, his foot touched a grill covering one of those electrified fans. A 19-ampere current passed into his body and caused him to go into cardiac arrest. He later died in a nearby hospital.
How did this pass any safety inspection? Why is their big toe so round? Oh my goodness. Look at that big toe. No, but seriously, how did they pass any? I don't get it.
And finally, sometime during 1984, a man died after suffering cardiac arrest, allegedly caused by the shock of cold water in the pool beneath the Tarzan swing. The water that day.
So only men die? Like, I swear they have 6 deaths and they're all men. There has to be some correlation. I don't know what.
Was believed
but
to be.
What they say? Correlation is not causation, or something like that.
Around 50 degrees. So at this point, let's go a little deeper into how and why Action Park.
The women knew better. The women tried to stay as safe as possible. Once they found out that they had a shack where they would try to see their breasts, they were like, okay, this park isn't for us. But then again, men are just daredevils to begin with. By men, I mean y'all, not me. I don't get adrenaline rush. You know what I'm saying? That's not how I like to live my life.
Was so dangerous and how it managed to continue running for so long. Firstly, many of the staff attendants were teenagers and poorly, if at all, trained. Many were under the influence of alcohol while working, and training was never taken particularly seriously. The former security director, Jim Desai, got the job at age 21. They cared little for enforcing the rules, and considering the attitude of at least quite a few of the patrons, that's not entirely surprising. Sometimes physical altercations occurred between between visitors or each other and staff. There was often physical disparity in favor of the patrons, and the teenage attendants didn't feel they had the power to discipline adult guests and would struggle to enforce the rules. This was definitely exacerbated by the availability and prevalence of alcohol on site. Beer was sold pretty much everywhere, and the drinking age rules were enforced in a particularly lax manner. The generally short distance between...
How did they get this to keep running though? Like that's not being explained.
Many of these kiosks and the rides involving operating motor vehicles with no safety equipment in a bathing suit really set people up for a rough time. It's fair to say that because Action Park was closer and slightly cheaper than the neighboring Six Flags Great Adventure Park, many of the patrons were from lower income communities who had less opportunity to learn how to swim, and the fact that the park was advertised heavily to the Spanish and Polish communities nearby, even though that there were no translated instructions, did set the...
Oh yes, all my native Spanish speakers, y'all can come here to a theme park that does not have Spanish. Everyone, around, all the Polish, you know what I'm saying? We have no representation here, but y'all can come along.
Park up for some trouble. There was a fundamental clash between how people viewed Action Park and what it intended itself to be. See, Gene's philosophy was that Action Park existed in a similar way a beach does. If someone swims out at a beach and drowns, it's a tragic accident, but there is more of a perceived onus on the swimmer for going out and making bad decisions.
He said, if you die at my park, that is your fault. You made the bad choice of coming here. That's a crazy hill to die on. That is an insane hill to die on.
And getting beyond their depth. Dying on a roller coaster, however, does feel somewhat different. You're kind of strapped and there's no skill involved in staying alive on a roller coaster. But it's been suggested that many of the patrons took that roller coaster attitude to Action Park and held not enough regard for their safety in the face of prevalent dangers because they never expected to need a level of control over the danger to stay safe. People just didn't realize that the wave pool was a genuine threat to life if used incorrectly, and the lifeguards regularly had to rescue people who jumped into the deep end without actually being able to swim. And again, turning to how the theme park ran for so many years with such a poor safety record, there are actually multiple interesting contributing factors. Because many of the rides were pioneering at the time, often built out of wild imagination as opposed to stringent engineering and testing, it was difficult for the regulatory authorities to control Action Park's rides,
that doesn't
especially
make sense.
In the early days.
No, that doesn't make sense. They basically said, hey, because they used their imagination for this park, we can't regulate it, guys. I mean, how dare we regulate somewhere where they use their imagination? Come on, dogs.
Mom, am I famous?
No, you're not famous. You're just silly.
If a person survived a test run and nothing visually was falling apart, that was considered adequately safe. It's probably not a huge leap to also say that a special relationship existed between Action Park and the state, as the park was only ever fined once in its operating history. In fact, there's a humorous anecdote that when the local government complained about the high demand for ambulances generated by Action Park, Gene simply bought the local hospital a new fleet of vehicles. Accident and injury reporting was often not done correctly or at all. And in cases where a claimant sought liability for injury, the park's legal attack dog attorney would viciously fight tooth and nail. In fact, it became difficult for victims to hire legal representation from the local lawyers purely because they all knew just how hard Action Park would fight every single claim through to trial. This was quite unusual for a business, but this is where we get to the downfall of Action Park.
Oh, I thought we saw the downfall.
Action Park wasn't forced closed, it actually went bankrupt. GAR simply couldn't contend with paying for everyone who got injured there. As one litigant alleged in the early 1990s, there were over 2,400 active or past litigants who were seeking compensation against GAR.
2,400? That gotta be some type of record. I'm gonna keep it a busy. I'm gonna keep it a busy, bro. That gotta be some type of record. There's no way.
It turned out that the reason Action Park fought so hard to avoid paying was simply because they had no insurance. It's surprisingly expensive
Of
to
course.
insure for rides that have a tendency
course
to
they
maim
don't.
and kill. So Gene came up with a pretty
they had no
ingenious
insurance.
solution. He just set up his own fake insurance company called London and World and insured Action Park for nominal cost. He then did something really crafty and underwrote his fake insurance company with an actual real firm called Dover Insurance, saying
So
to
he just has
anyone who
money.
asked that they would cover any gaps in his own coverage.
He just has money.
Dover and nobody else realized that this meant they'd be covering literally any payouts. It was a clever workaround that avoided Gene needing to pay any
What the heck
premiums
am I
while
looking at
still
right here?
technically
What am I
operating with
looking at?
some coverage. Not
What am I
surprisingly,
looking
the
at?
government were not happy
That
to
looks
find this
terrifying.
out, but Gene did make the argument. He paid out of his own pocket whenever someone got injured. And by February 1996, the
this?
constant legal attacks culminated with the
Off-brand
creditors
bungee
who had
jumping.
taken on their $14 million debt, petitioning the company to force it into bankruptcy. And a year later, in 1997, they announced the cessation of all operations. What followed was, in short, a changing of hands between multiple owners, modifications, closures, to produce a changing of hands between multiple owners, modifications, closures, to produce a much tamer version of the original Action Park. Many of the ride's most dangerous attractions were either removed completely, buried, or made significantly tamer. The Action Park that ran for 2 decades was no more.
I like the other slide more, even though it looks extremely stupid.
A huge reason why Action Park continued for so long was simply because it was loved by a great many people. In fact, the park often made the argument that although a lot of people were injured and, well, killed sometimes, they
Oh
did
my
serve
gosh.
millions and millions of customers every year who had a great experience.
That's a-
Gene's fundamental ethos was to put people in control of the
That's
action,
right,
and this
but
unique
still, that's
experiment
crazy.
created great memories for a lot of people. The bumps and injuries were often considered a source of pride and proof that you had survived Action Park.
The bumps and injuries were pride that you survived the park. That is insane. That's a horrific way to think, bro.
But thanks to woke, children these days pretty much will never get the chance to experience the sheer joy of entering cardiac arrest halfway down an artificial water chute composed entirely of rebar concrete and exposed wiring. And I think that's a great shame. Action Park is a unique relic of a long gone pre-health and safety era of history that could never realistically be replicated today. If you enjoyed this video and want to dive in any further, I'd highly recommend
It was a great video, and Action Park seems like it had a whole bunch of unnecessary action, like lawsuits, actions. Amazing video, CX Productions. Goodness gracious, though. That's an insane video. I'm not gonna lie.